Hey guys, I've got this 2017 Chevy Trax. So this Chevy Trax, it has the 1.4 liter turbo engine. But the reason this little Chevy Trax is in here, this is a new customer, found us online. And he previously had this car at another shop because the check engine light was on. Which, as you can see, it's off right now, but if I drive it half a mile down the street, it'll come on. So let's get a scanner on this thing and see what kind of codes we're getting. All right guys, so this is the code that it keeps throwing. It's this P1101 intake airflow system performance. Now the reason he brought this car to our shop is because at the other shop where he previously had it, he says that they replaced the mass airflow sensor 3 different times and the check engine light kept coming back on. He said they tried different brands of sensors and none of it worked. And the check engine light kept coming back on, so they finally called him and told him, just pick it up, we don't know what to do with it. Now basically what this code is indicating is that there's a discrepancy between the amount of air that the car thinks is coming into the engine versus the amount of air that actually is coming into the engine. And that could be caused by a lot of different things. So let's take a look under the hood and see what we got going on here. Okay, so here under the hood, there's a few things that I'm noticing. Number one is the mass airflow sensor has definitely been changed, but I don't see any markings on the sensor. I don't know what brand it is. It doesn't look like a Delco sensor. Also, this PCV hose has been replaced, going from the intake all the way down to the turbo. Also, the purge valve for the evap system is new. It's been replaced, the purge valve with this little pipe here. But it looks like the evap line got broken, or at least the clip that retains it is broken, so that's not too good, but it may not be causing a problem, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. The air box has obviously been off. As you can see, that grommet back there is missing. It's actually fallen back down right there where I'm pointing my finger, so I'll need to fish that out. And looking at the air box is not even properly installed, so that will need to be addressed as well. And actually at first when I opened the hood, this tube going to the airbox was actually not properly installed in the groove where it's supposed to go, so I did have to loosen this up and adjust that. The only other thing I see that's pretty obvious right now is there's a little bit of a coolant leak going on right here from the top of this thermostat housing. This is actually a really common leak point on these 1.4 liter engines. It looks like somebody's already put a hose clamp here. And actually, come to think of it, this clamp right here is not original either. This is just some kind of a generic hose clamp. Anyway, I don't want to get too lost in all these little details here. So let's see what we need to do to fix the problem. Of this particular code that it's throwing, probably the most common issue that I've seen that causes it, if you pop this little cover off here, there is a PCV valve, which is actually this little guy right here. So the crankcase vent valve on this particular engine is built into the valve cover. So in order to replace the PCV valve, you have to replace the entire valve cover. Pretty smart. And so a lot of times on this particular code, if you crank up the engine and have it idling, you come out here, pop this cover off, you can put your finger here, and if you feel or hear air getting sucked in through here, then that PCV valve is broken internally and you need to buy a valve cover. But in this case, I let the engine run and I don't feel any air leaking through here. But we need to do a few tests here, so we'll see for sure what the issue is. And just to clarify the meaning of this code that it's throwing, so all the air coming in through the engine passes through here in front of the mass airflow sensor. So the MAF sensor is reading all the air coming in. The air goes through here, into the turbo, through the intercooler. Ultimately, it comes up this intercooler pipe here, goes through the throttle body, into the intake, and into the engine. So we have the mass airflow sensor that's taking readings. We have actually also a MAP sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor, that's right here in the intake as well. That's taking readings. The car thinks, based on what the sensors are telling it, that there should be X amount of air coming into the engine, but based on the actual fuel trim numbers, the O2 sensor readings, the throttle position and all that, it can tell actually how much air really is coming in. So with this code, all that it's saying is that there's a discrepancy between these things. Okay, so I've let this thing warm up. So one thing that sort of worries me off the bat is the throttle position at idle. The normal reading on this car should be between about 8 to 12% at idle when the car is fully warmed up with no AC on, no electrical load. And here I'm sitting around 7.5, and I even saw it a minute ago dip down into the 6s. So what that kind of tells me is that I'm worried that there could be unmetered air getting into the engine, and so the throttle plate is trying to close even more than it normally should to make up for that unmetered air getting in. My fuel trims though at idle are pretty good. I mean, long-term fuel trim around 6%. That's not too bad. But let's go drive this thing and see what it does here. Okay, so I'm driving this thing, and one issue that I'm noticing here is when I really get on the throttle, watch what happens to the fuel trims here. Look, so I'm getting on the throttle and I'm almost feeling a lack of power, and the fuel trims long-term are going really negative. So let me get off the throttle. And then they start to come back up a little bit. So let me get on the throttle again. And so I'm kind of getting into it here. So I'm parked here now and I'm just idling, and the fuel trim numbers are back to normal. So, you know, anywhere from 0 to 10% are considered normal. But my throttle position is really low compared to what I would think it would be. And so every time when I'm driving and I really get on the throttle and this long-term fuel trim number goes negative, like negative 24, that's not supposed to happen. What this means is that when I get on the gas, there's either too much fuel or not enough air getting into the engine. When it shows negative 24, it's subtracting 24% less fuel than what it normally would put in to try to compensate and get the engine running exactly at the right air fuel mix. Kind of leaning to not enough air based on the code that it's throwing. And the only way in my mind that would be possible is maybe a vacuum leak or something to where the full amount of air passing through the mass airflow sensor is not getting to the engine somehow. So let me actually do a smoke test on this thing and let's see what we can find out. And I'm actually curious here. So I've added the mass airflow sensor and the calculated airflow to the PIDs here. And I switched the units over to metric so I could read grams per second. So here at idle, on the mass airflow, I'm measuring about 1.6, 1.7 grams per second. And the calculated airflow, like I mentioned earlier, it also uses a map sensor and the throttle position in addition to the mass airflow sensor to calculate how much air actually is coming in. So at various points during driving, there's too much of a discrepancy in these numbers and it throws the code. And as you can see, the check engine light's already on. So let's go smoke test it and see if we can find anything out. Okay, so ideally when you're doing a smoke test to try to find vacuum leaks, you want to do it while the engine is cold, because sometimes you might have an intake gasket that's leaking, for example, and the gasket leaks when the engine's cold, and then when the vehicle warms up, everything expands and then the gasket seals up and then you can't find the leak anymore. So it's always best to do it while it's cold. And I find a good spot to do it on this engine would be right here. This is the line going to the brake booster. So if I undo this one, the rest of this tube is separate from the system, so I don't have to worry about smoke coming out of the other end of this tube, and I can just induce smoke straight here into the intake. So I have my little smoke machine connected to shop air, and this is where the smoke's going to be coming out of. So let me get this hose installed right here. And actually what I want to do as well is I want to cap this off right here. If this is capped off, then pressure from the smoke will build up in the system and it'll force it out of wherever the leak is. Versus if I just leave this open into the air, there's really no pressure building up in here, so I may not see a leak. And I'm just going to use one of these little plugs, these little caps, put it in there and tighten this clamp down. Okay, so I have my leads connected to the battery from the smoke machine directly to the battery. So now my machine is turned on. And wow, okay, I'm immediately seeing smoke. So let's see what in the world is going on here. Wow, that's a lot of smoke actually coming out. Where in the world? Okay, I see a problem here, guys. This hose going from the intercooler to the throttle body has got a huge split in it. So that would kind of make sense with my theory here. If air is coming in through here, and at this point the air has already gone through the turbo, this is under boost pressure. So when I really get on the throttle, a lot of that air that's already been calculated for is getting sprayed out of this tube. So the full amount of air is actually not reaching the engine here. So that would make sense why our fuel trim numbers are going negative under throttle. Okay, so this charged air cooler hose, I've got one here. As you can see, this thing's pretty big and bulky, and it's even got a sensor on here. Probably some kind of a boost pressure sensor, I'm guessing. Now, is this the only problem with this Trax, or is there another problem in addition to it? Well, I don't know. We got to put this hose on first and then retest. Okay, so I've got the vehicle on the lift. I wasn't sure exactly what all I would have to do to change that charge air hose, but I took the tire off and did the fender liner, and if you get back in here, this is part of it right here, so you can definitely see where it goes. I have all the splash guard and everything loose. Right under here, there's two 8mm bolts that hold this to the subframe, and then there's my boost pressure sensor, and then where the hose goes into the intercooler is right here. And then it's got a little retaining clip I have to pop off, and then it'll slide out. And actually, it's a good thing I took the fender liner off, because this is the way that I found was a good way to take it out. It's through here. So, there we go. Check out that big old split right there. Okay, so the repair's been complete. The charged air hose has been replaced. Took a little persuasion to fish this hose up through here, but it wasn't too bad overall. Okay guys, so I'm driving this thing around. I'm fully warmed up, and check out the long-term fuel trim. So let me get on the throttle here. So I'm on the throttle, I'm accelerating, and check it out. Now let me get off the throttle. My numbers are really good now, guys. This thing is going through a little bit of a relearn. That's why you'll see a few weird things in the numbers, because I cleared the codes and this thing has to relearn the adaptive fuel trim values. But see, right now I'm accelerating and we're no longer going way negative on the fuel trims. And I no longer feel that hesitation when I'm accelerating. Okay, so I'm back here at the shop. I've driven this car about 6 miles right now. And before, I would drive half a mile and it would already set a code, but there's no code being set right now. And if you check out the rest of the numbers, you see our throttle position is way up. It's closer to 8%. Before, it kept dipping down into the 6s. Also, if you notice, now our mass airflow sensor and our calculated airflow, the numbers we're getting here, there was a bit of a discrepancy beforehand, but now these numbers are pretty much matching up and they're mirroring each other. So that's a good sign as well. And let's go into the codes just to make sure that we're not having a pending code and we're not getting anything, guys. So I'm going to call this fixed. I'm going to get it back to the customer and he'll be good to go. And of course, in case you guys are wondering, I am going to let the customer know about the coolant leak that I found. I've been keeping an eye on it. It really isn't leaking that bad, but I will let him know about it. So I appreciate you guys once again for watching. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.